and YouTube. Hopefully this is working. Let me make sure. Yep. I do think I need to. I hate getting things set up. Perfect. All right. So that's all good. So if you're here already, welcome in. For those of you who have never been to one of my streams before, what we're doing today is we're going to be reading the next two chapters of a fic called The Children's Rebellion. If you have not read it before, I encourage you to go do so. It's a very good fic. And basically, this stream, we're going to be reading chapters 11 and 12. And then after that, if I feel up for it, we're just going to crochet. Welcome in, Alex. Hi. So yeah, I'm just going to give it a few more minutes for people to come in. And then, yeah, and then we'll get started. So, and that way it gives me time to make sure that everything is all set up. Perfect. Stream Elements is operational in both chats. So welcome in, new people. We're going to get started in just a second. So I'm going to ping the Discord. Mm-hmm. I am Alex. I am also live on Twitch. My Twitch is reading_Rizzo. So. Okay. All right, perfect. Thank you for all the likes, guys. Thank you. And thank you for the follow, Alex. I see you now on Twitch. Nice. Well, I think this is a pretty good time now to get started. So yes. So if you have never heard of TCR before, I encourage you. Thank you, Marcus, for the follow. I encourage you to check it out. It is available on AO3. If you do !TCR in either the Twitch or the YouTube chats, it should give you a link to the fic. So I encourage you to check it out. It's a very good fic. So yeah, so let's get started. Let me make sure. All right. And if you want to read along, I will have the text on screen if you're watching on Twitch or YouTube. Unfortunately, I don't have that on TikTok. So if you're watching on TikTok, feel free to come over to Twitch or YouTube so you can read along with me. All right, let's get started. The Children's Rebellion by Aria_Cinnabon. Chapter 11. Tubbo talks about his marriage for the 50th time. Music can heal the wounds that medicine cannot touch. Debasish Mridha. I know I butchered that. Happy birthday, Tommy! He clapped two hands over his ears as light plundered his eyes, hurting more than every retina scan or injury he'd ever had. He blinked again and saw nearly 12.5 people standing around a Victoria sponge cake, 17 red and white candles burning. Tommy spun fun to see a proud-looking Toho next to him, the boy having instigated a conversation outside the door that the rest of the crew had filed through. He hadn't even noticed that they'd left the hallway, too busy talking about cosmetology and the current popular theory that space-time could be superfluid. Apparently, it was split down the line. Many physicists believed that while stars, galaxies, and planets rotated, the universe itself did not. Tubbo, like many people, assumed that the universe was same in every direction. Rotation itself required an axis, though general relativity could allow the universe to rotate. Assuming that the universe had a cosmic axis of rotation would make it seem like a particular direction of the universe, namely down its axis. Superfluidity, the property of a fluid with zero viscosity that flowed without the loss of any kinetic energy. Indefinite movement could apply to the universe in Tommy's argument. He reasoned that the lower the superfluid's viscosity, the more turbulent the fluid is, something commonly observed at the beginning of a black hole. After all, people had been searching for years for ways to get gravity to agree with quantum mechanics, and it was just a theory. Anyway, it was safe to say that Tubbo had perfectly distracted Tommy, enough for them to shout happy birthday and scare the shit out of him. Not like anybody except Purple saw his slight flinch. Perhaps Tubbo did as well, because his eyes narrowed slightly. Bright smile on Tommy's face deterred any evidence that he had cringed at the sudden yelling. The past should stay in the past. There were gifts, too. Tommy blew out his candles after making a wish, and he was surprised when he found out the crew had apparently gone and gotten him gifts. Some of them had apologized for not getting him something perfect, as they had short notice. He had admitted that these were the first birthday gifts, minus the ones on the red planet, he'd gotten in years. He sat down and cried. Wilbur made fun of him. Tommy called him a bitch boy, and Nicky threatened to stick him with a hypo spray. All in all, a great birthday party, and the first one he spent with something akin to a family. Even in Poctopia, there had been few of them, and they had always had a sense of foreboding. Tubbo got him a stuffed cow that he named Henry. He made a big deal out of calling it a children's toy, but he tucked it under his arm and didn't let go. Later, in a dorm assigned to him by Fleet School, he was alone and didn't have a roommate, not that he cared. He put it on his bedside table and stroked the soft, synthetic fur, smiling. Nicky got him a set of hyposprays. He rolled his eyes as she lifted off the maladies they were supposed to cure. Apparently, it was because he hadn't gotten his vaccinations yet. And then, when he was eating cake, she snuck up and used them one by one every time he looked away. He hissed at her every time as well and threatened to beat her up. She was, after all, only 5 feet 5 inches. He was also terrified of her. Thank you, Mapook, for the follow. Techno got him a book, an actual book, labeled The Myth of Theseus. Apparently, it was a Greek myth, like the ones the half-piglin had been reading in the sitting room waiting for Tommy. Tommy hugged it to his chest and tried not to cry. Books were damn expensive, and little did Techno know that this myth was his favorite one. Puffy used to read it to him when he was little, and she always said that Tommy reminded her of Theseus. Phil's gift was a little more straightforward. It was his own data pad for school, which he was glad for, and immediately created his own account and went around adding all the crew's contacts. He pointedly avoided Wilbur, then added it when the Phantom wasn't looking. Phil also explained that communicators like Tommy had used on Falier 6 were military grade, and even cadets like himself aren't allowed to use or carry them. Tommy resolved to steal one from the Manberg when he could. Purple got him a butterfly knife, and Tommy smiled at him as he was reminded of the hot pink knife back on Poctopia he'd used to cut apples. This one was made of pink as well. This one was pink as well, but it was made of shiny metal and folded up nicely. Wilbur was thoughtful, perhaps more thoughtful than Tommy thought he was capable of, and instead of a joke book or something equally stupid, he handed Tommy 2 boxes of LED strips, something about 21st century kids in decorating their rooms. Tommy had a bright grin on his face as he hugged them to his chest, resolving to put them up later that night. He did eventually, and flicked between them on an ancient remote that doesn't work as fast as he wanted to. but he basked in the dark navy light, and he smiled into the near darkness. Rambu got him 3 cans of frosting, and Tommy threw one at the Andarian's head. In the same breath, Dream got him a booster seat, clapped him on the shoulders, and begged him to take the seat as the pilot. Apparently, they were missing a CTO and an official navigator, which explained the bridge's missing seats. Fortunately, they hadn't needed a CTO in the past missions, and Techno had been taking over navigation duties. Unlike other ships, Phil had been steady in saying they didn't need a navigator. Techno did the work of a navigator perfectly fine, as he'd been one before he'd been promoted to first officer by his captain. Tommy had taken out the knife Purple had given him and stabbed the booster seat in front of Dream's eyes for good measure, throwing the human the middle finger. Drista was a bit more thoughtful than her idiotic older brother and teamed up with Lonnie to buy him a keyboard piano. He stared at her, shocked, and Purple headed, "Quinn, we're reading TCR. We're on chapter 11. Drista was a bit more thoughtful than her idiotic older brother and teamed up with Lonnie to buy him a keyboard piano. He stared at her shocked, and Purple had admitted to telling them that Tommy had once played piano long ago. When asked how Purple knew that, the magenta-eyed boy glanced at Tommy with a slight furrow and then went on to lie that Tommy had told him, which wasn't far from the truth. But Tommy had told him years and years ago and hadn't expected Purple to remember. He knew he wouldn't play piano for a good while. It had been a long time, but his heart went out to the 2 girls he barely knew who had gotten him an instrument after asking one of his friends. "I didn't know you played piano," Tubbo told him as he put a hand on the plastic cover that encased the pretty thing after the 2 of them had lugged it into his dorm late it was morning now. "I don't," he said. "Well, I did. I haven't played in half a decade." He doesn't say that his love of the piano died with his parents. He didn't say that he turned to another instrument so he could ignore his past. "I play piano," Tubbo told him, as Tommy withdrew the knife Purple had gotten him to cut off the plastic casing. It wasn't like he didn't want to play the piano. He did, so badly, but every time he sat down and put his keys on the fingers, he reminded of gentle hands over his as they taught him the notes. Every time he heard the notes, he was reminded of quiet laughter and hot apple cider and a better time and a naive child. Tommy stepped away and gestured toward a chair they'd pulled up from the tiny built-in kitchen. "What?" Tubbo asked him. "Now?" "Why not?" He said. "It's your piano. And I'm so out of practice that I would sound like a dying cat," he said. "Besides, you said you play." Tubbo smiled as he sat down, putting his hands on the newly uncovered piano keys. "There's a piano in the rec room on the L'Manberg," he said, pausing. "Fundy plays it sometimes. I do too." Tommy nodded as Tubbo played the first notes of an unfamiliar song in the dorm room's LED-lit darkness. He thought the 2 minutes that the shulker played the song were 2 minutes he could forget everything that had happened to him. For those 2 minutes, he could hold his breath and pretend that things were going to get better from here. For 2 minutes, he could close his eyes and pretend that everything was going to be okay. When those 2 minutes were over, he felt emptier than he had before. He felt like something had come back and then left, creating a more significant gap as it ripped through his heart. He wiped away the tears from his face and twisted away as Tubbo smiled proudly, turning towards him. "That was called Rosemary's Theme," the shulker said. "It's an old Terran song that was derived from a book." "It's very pretty," he said, his voice cracking halfway through as he blinked to dispel the tears, glad of the darkness. Tubbo was silent as Tommy stared at the unfamiliar walls of his doors. "I know," his friend said quietly. "I cried when I listened to it." "Oh," he said. "It's okay to cry," Tubbo said, and he felt an arm pat him awkwardly on his back as he breathed through his nose and told him in the same breath that he shouldn't be crying. "It's okay, Tommy. It's not the music," he said. "I'm glad you think that my instrumental skills are bad enough that you tuned out and thought of someone else." Tommy laughed wetly, turning to face Tubbo. He knew that the shulker saw the tears shining on his face in the dim light. But there wasn't even pity, just understanding. "It's not you, I promise. I've heard that before, Tubbo assured him, the corner of his mouth twisting into something akin to a smirk. It's not me, it's you, isn't it? We're not in a relationship, he said, biting back the laughter. Um, Thank you so much for the snowman, Mapoos. Thank you. Um, you're right, Tubbo said seriously. I'm married to Rambu. I think he would hate if I cheated on him. Didn't you guys get divorced? Only officially, Tubbo said dreamily. Tommy stared at him. You're in love with Rambu? It wasn't that he believed that. He didn't. Neither of them gave off that vibe, but he was just making sure. What? Tubbo said, staring at him as if he'd grown a third leg. What gave you that idea? I don't know, Tommy said wryly. Maybe it's because you talk about marrying him all the time? Tubbo rolled his eyes. We're in a platonic relationship, Tommy. Is this platonic relationship consensual? He's fine with it, Tubbo said, pausing. Sometimes. That's helpful, Tommy said, glancing at the piano behind Tommy and swallowing, the slight reprieve he'd gotten withdrawing and releasing a flood of emotions. Tubbo saw his look and smiled caringly. The piano reminded you of something? What? He said, glancing at the shorter boy. I don't know. I think it's PTSD or some shit. I could probably get Nicky to diagnose. No, he said firmly, louder than he probably should have. It's fine, Tubbo. I think I was joking. Tubbo looked at him doubtfully. Well, my dad used to teach me the piano. Sam? Tubbo asked. No, he said sarcastically. My other father. Yes, Sam. Tubbo rolled his eyes. Anyway, I stopped playing after he died, for both obvious reasons and mental ones. You still remember the keys? Yes, he said instantly. It's not that I don't want to play. I do, but it hurts. Then don't play, Tubbo told him. But Lonnie and Drista will understand, Tubbo said. He tilted his head. How did Purple know you played the piano? I told him, Tommy said, sort of. I just meant it in passing. It's not his fault. He did not mention that he didn't tell Purple that he had switched instruments. There had only been 2 people who knew his current one, or at least the one he knew best, and that one's full of bad memories as well. He did not mention that the 2 people who knew he could play the instrument he had learned after his parents' death would never tell anyone again. Besides, he said, it's the thought that counts. And that was true. He's glad that Lonnie and Drista, and technically Purpled, contributed to getting him a piano, even if it gave him uncontrollable emotions. Even after Tubbo was long gone, Tommy sat on a chair and placed his hands on the keys, just centimeters away from pressing down. He couldn't bring himself to play a single note. A single tear rolled down his face, and he watched as it plopped onto the new white keys, and he cried because he was weak. Tommy got his schedule the next day. He had 7 classes, one of which wasn't even supposed to be a class that he should take in history, taught to people who didn't come from Earth. This would not be very pleasant. He was listed as a human, after all. He was pretty interested in the classes the Admiral had signed him up for, besides human history. Survival strategies, if only he'd had that on the red. Early Galactic Rebellion history, that one was mandatory, and Tommy knew he could pass that class if he slept with everyone, thanks to his dad and aunt. There was also Advanced Subspace Geometry, which sounded interesting enough. Interspecies Protocol, Flight Control, and Basic Leadership. Flight Control was an elective for the Helmsman command path. He knew that much. Puffy had spoken of it with a fond look on her face, sometimes claiming that she enjoyed one-upping the males in her class who often told her that she would never be as good as them. Despite all her setbacks, despite the poor welcoming she had received, what with female felines having a reputation of, well, as prostitutes. That had been a very long time ago, and had been a horrible history that the felines fought so hard to from. But the reputation existed, and so did the racialists. His aunt, after all, was not an avian, nor was she related to him by blood. That had never bothered him before, and it didn't now. Puffy had fought her for her position, through tears and blood and racism, and she had damn well earned it. He knew that, Sam knew that, their crew had known that, and that was what mattered. There were 2 felines on the L'Manberg that Tommy knew of, drawing up the mental list he had easily pulled off the public records. Dream's not boyfriend George, and Harvey, who had temporarily replaced Tubbo on the bridge when they had been in prison. And of course, Techno, who was half pig and half feline. Techno didn't bear the typical feline traits, no ears or vertical pupils, but if Tommy didn't know better, he would say that Techno could, probably, like all felines, jump higher or perhaps have an easier time landing. He didn't know. He sat in the back of his classes and waved at Lonnie and Drista when he saw they shared his second period class, Survival Strategies. Drista also shared his leadership class, and Tommy quickly found out that Lonnie did not have that class, as she was not on the command path, unlike him and the blonde-haired human girl. He also found out that there were way too many assholes in Fleetwool. Even worse than Wilbur, and that was saying something because Wilbur was seriously annoying. Drista and Lonnie were decently well liked. They were, after all, the youngest to serve on a starship, with Lonnie's brother being the youngest ever to serve as a lieutenant. He nearly punched a guy in the face after he said a snide comment about Tommy sleeping with one of them. Fuck that guy, seriously. But saw the expression on Lonnie and spit in the guy's face instead. You should join track, Trista told him after he'd successfully outrun that guy through the hallways into his final class, basic leadership. You'd be good at it. Nikki would kill me, he told her, only half listening as their Elytrian teacher read out the terms knowledge objectives from the syllabus. She'd kill you if you did what you did in the gym, Drista pointed out. I know Tubbo, being a shulker, to work hard to get on varsity track. Shulkers exhausted quicker, something to do with the stamina biologically able to tap into that fourth dimensional space. Perhaps he'd learn about that in interspecies protocol, but avians were made to run. I think I was made to hide, he muttered, tapping his datapad against the desk. Thomas Michaels? It took him a while to glance up, as that was not his real name, nor had it been the name that he'd gone under in Pogtopia. That would be too easy to connect. Too easy to look at the name that was on the mural in the L'Manberg, and no doubt elsewhere, as the names of the deceased were quite public. Yes? Were you paying attention, Mr. Michaels? No, he said truthfully, and half the class snickered. The teacher, a female blazeborn with red hair and golden eyes, sighed. Can you please name the ranks of the Galactic Rebellion? He said. Sure. The admiral's the highest, then comes the rear admiral, the branch admiral, the vice admiral, the commodore, the fleet captain, the captain, commander, lieutenant commander. Mr. Michaels, you can stop right there, their teacher. He was pretty sure her name was Mrs. Carpenter. Said, Did you study the class beforehand? He blinked, glancing at Drista nervously. The human girl offered him an unreadable look. No, ma'am. This is my second day on Earth. By now, he was cringing at his desk as the entire class was looking at him. You are human? Yes, he said. But I was born on a spaceship. I've always wanted to go to fleet school, so here we are. He didn't mention any of the in-between. He didn't mention his parents were dead, or that he was from the HMS Fran, even though he'd gotten the okay from the Admiral to say so. He'd spoken with the Vice Admiral about the HMS Fran over a video call at breakfast. It was interesting, to say the least. The only thing he hadn't mentioned was the string of code, because they had told him to trust nobody. And so he hadn't. And you, the human girl next to Mr. Michaels, Mrs. Carpenter asked Drista sharply, who was smirking openly. Can you name the rest of the ranks that Mr. Michaels so kindly started? Sure, said Drista. Where were we? Lieutenant Commander, Tommy said. Right, Drista nodded. Then comes lieutenants, junior lieutenants, and then ensigns. If you want to get into cadets, then comes midshipmen, and then them. She waved her hands. Cadets. Tommy noted she didn't include herself in the mixing. I suppose you grew up on a spaceship too, Miss Carpenter said disbelievingly. Ma'am, I am a junior tactical officer aboard the L'Manberg, Drista said evenly, not able to completely keep the arrogance out of her voice. You must be Drista, then, the blonde-haired human inclined her head gracefully at the recognition. Welcome back. Thanks. Mrs. Carpenter moved on to questioning other students, but Tommy noted the lingering glances that he and Drista both received. Still, that was to be expected, and he smiled as Lonnie and Drista met after class in the hallways. You coming to Little Manberg with us? Lonnie asked him after hugging her friend. Is that allowed? He asked Riley. We're part of the crew. What are they going to do? Not let us on? Fair point, Tommy said. I don't know if they want me there, though. Don't worry, Drista said. They do. Thanks, he muttered. Tommy's going to join track, Drista said, scowling at the older Elytrian who shoved her out of the way. Lonnie put a calming hand on her shoulder. So he's not coming back to the ship right away. I never agreed to that, he argued. But you're going to do it, Drista said, crossing her arms and narrowing her eyes. He cut himself off. Maybe. Great, Lonnie said. I'll tell Tubbo and the rest of them. The track is just outside. She rattled off a bunch of directions that left his head spinning. You'll be the only human, probably, Drista said. Listed officially, I mean. He raised an eyebrow. Do humans not join track? No, she said. They do, very occasionally. The problem lies in the fact that you're allowed to use your racial abilities. Not wings, though. Drista tilted her head. That's why all the long jumpers and pole vaulters are felines. So, he said, phantoms can just go into their phantom state? I mean, I suppose, Lonnie cut in doubtfully. There's a no harming other competitors rule, so that for the Enderians, they can't just push people with their minds because they feel like it. And I wouldn't see the point of using the phantom state. It's not like it's any faster. Felines dominate that industry, like merlins do swimming. That's a separate team. There's a separate team for the Elytrians. Good to know, he said. What about teleporting? Rombo can do that when he tries, Drissa said. I don't know if you knew this, but it's a scarce ability, and not one that would work in track, as it takes time for the particles to gather. Also, it's only short distances. I knew some of that, he muttered. He'd only seen Rombo teleport twice, once because the Children's Rebellion had wanted to see it, and once to get away from Tommy as he tried to feed him food. It wasn't like he could leak that he knew. See you after the meet, Tommy, Lonnie said with a bright smile as she pulled Drista away from a glaring cadet. Why does everyone hate you so much? He called after them. Jealousy, Drista shouted, flipping off the next person who gave her a skeptical look that was more than just a cursory glance. They're just envying I'm cooler than they are. That sounds like something I'd say, he muttered as he turned and began making his way through the hallways, the stream of cadets growing less and less as he headed further into the school. Eventually, after finding 2 dead ends and asking random teachers directions, he made his way outside to the back of Fleet School and to the track and soccer field. A congregation of students had already gathered in the corner of the red-flecked track field in their customary blue uniforms that Tommy despised almost as much as he despised Wilbur. He plastered an amicable look on his face and wandered over there, feeling slightly out of place in the grouping. He noted that 90% of the students here were felines, with their different colored ears and vertical pupils. He also noted with surprise that there were a few merlings there, 2 Enderians, a trio of phantoms, and 1 other human. They sneered at him when they saw him, already doubting his abilities with their petty racism, despite quite literally being on the planet designated as the origin of humans. Well, he was fucked. He was also going to get top marks, even if it killed him. Actually, if it did kill him, Nikki would find some way to revive him, and he'd spend the rest of his days with hypo sprays sticking out of his neck. That almost made him debate not using his avian biology, but, well, he wanted to win. He wanted to be the best. He was the best. He was Tommy fucking Innes, and he would spit in their faces and see them on the finish line. And that is the end of chapter 11. All right. Chapter 12 time. All right. This is one of my favorite chapters, I'll be honest. So, chapter 12. Tommy fucking Innes kicked their fucking asses. That's what fucking happened. You may be the only person left who believes in you, but it's enough. It takes just 1 star to pierce the universe of darkness. Never give up. Rochelle E. Goodrich. Right, the head coach said, clapping his hands. His ears, vanilla with chocolate tips, flicked as the ghost of a breath of wind sped over the group. Hope you all brought your running shoes because this term is going to go by quickly. You're old enough to know that we aren't going to teach you how to run, only get you to compete. I'm Coach Ant, but just call me Ant. This is the other coach. The feline with the orange ears waved eagerly. Velvet, but he's my boyfriend, so don't hit on him. A smattering of laughter ran over the crowd. Have any of you ever been on a track team? Tommy raised his hand. He was the only one. Aunt rubbed his forehead. Son, are you sure you should be here? Yes, he said. I ran track fields all the time back home. He didn't mention that home was a spaceship, but he recognized at least one person from his survival studies class, so they were bound to know. Not that they spoke up. Okay, Aunt said, slight disbelief behind his tone. Tommy shrugged, uncaring of the feline's opinion of him. It would change soon enough. The coaches had them do a jog around the track, which was pleasant enough in the spring, though Tommy admitted that he had to draw on his abilities as an avian to make the run. He really needed to train more. And he sort of relished the slight burn in his legs and the heaving in his lungs as he finished. After that, they were sort of divided into groups based on the running they wanted to do. Tommy knew Nikki would kill him if he did anything more than 100 yards. She was probably going to kill him anyway. Still, he wanted as minor damage as possible from the Merling doctor. There were about 12 students in his group, including a singular human girl who was shying away from a group of felines that were laughing at her and muttering things. Hey, he said in greeting. She glanced at him nervously. Hi. I'm Tommy, he said. You're human too? She flinched as one of the felines nearby shouted something derogatory that made Tommy glare at them. Ignore the accent. Elytrian parents brought me up. Oh, he said. That's pretty cool. Not when you're the only one that can't fly, she said with a sigh. Anyway, that's why I joined fleet school. Not that I'm trying to put my whole life story on you. You seem nicer than those dickheads, he said, raising his voice so they could hear him as the group watched the tryouts of the 400-yard runners. I suppose, she smiled at him, her blue eyes more like the sky than ocean, as Tubbo's was. What's your name? Snæfrish. What? He asked. Snæfrish, she repeated, a slight hesitation in her gaze. It's Elytrian for fallen angels. Ah, he said, trying to make sense of the nonsensical word. I'm going to call you Sniff. Why? Because I can't pronounce your name, he admitted. She shrugged, adjusting her headband in her hair. Fine with me. It's better than the name calling I get in class. They're assholes, he said stoutly. Ignore them. That's not quite how it works. Then go deaf, he told her. Sniff laughed in disbelief, covering her mouth slightly and falling silent as the students around them turned to look at the duo. Why are you giving me that look? I'm not going to give myself a disability. Why not? Sniff paused, amusement in her sky blue eyes, because that thing would make things more difficult. Her shoulders shifted as if she imagined something behind her. But you could ignore bullies, he protested. You could not get the procedure to fix your ears and just go around with a remote control and turn off your hearing aids when you feel like it. That seems counterproductive. It would be epic. Mr. Michaels and Miss Velvet trailed off as he glanced down at the clipboard. Sniff, she said, glancing at Tommy, who inclined his head. I go by Sniff. That's such a fucking stupid name, the feline next to Tommy snorted. And your name is fucking Jacob, he retorted as Sniff looked at her feet quiet. Imagine being your parents and not having an abortion and then naming their bitch of a child Jacob. He shook his head. Couldn't be my parents. My parents actually had some self-worth. You, the feline snarled, looking slightly surprised that Tommy knew his name. Of course, he'd nearly been hit by a basketball thrown from one of Jacob's friends, so he did know the asshole's name. Now, Velvet said, hiding a smirk behind his clipboard. Tommy liked him immediately. No arguing. We want to be a team here, after all. Jacob crossed his arms. I don't want to be on a team with him, Captain. I doubt he could even make junior varsity. Oh, yeah, he snarled. Try me, fucker. Oh, you want to go? No, I want to beat you. Tommy paused. And I am going to beat you, you turtle fuck. What's wrong with turtles? Sniff asked. He glanced at her. They're slow and green. What's wrong with being slow and green? The girl responded, her eyes twisting slightly as she held back her smirk, her lips twisting slightly as she held back her smirk. Everything, he hissed. Green is the worst color. It's like the color of vomit and grass and trees. Don't plants give you oxygen? Stop questioning me, he snapped. Okay, Velvet said, interrupting with what was definitely a smirk on his face. Jacob had a dumbstruck look on his face, and the rest of the group was dead silent. Sniff subsided with a funny look on her face. Tommy stuck out his tongue at her. We're just going to proceed with tryouts, seeing as the rest of the groups are done. Tommy glanced behind him and realized that, yeah, the rest of the groups were watching his. I need you to line up in groups of 2. The first will race, and then the second. Since you'll be racing 100 yards, we'll have a breather, and then you'll do it again in the same order. Got it? Wordlessly, Tommy moved to the back of the line at position 4, and after a second, Sniff moved into group 2 at position 5. Jacob sneered at him and pushed one of his buddies ahead, jostling Tommy slightly. You think you're so great, huh? The feline said. I know I'm great, Tommy told him. It's only a matter of proving it. You're such a fucking smartass. I am brilliant, he said, a quick grin filling his face. People like Jacob didn't particularly bother him. Well, I just got banned on TikTok. That, what? Huh. No, I don't agree with this violation reason. Yeah, look. I just I just got banned off TikTok. What the fuck? Okay. What the heck? Well, I just got banned on TikTok. All right. I guess the show must go on, and we just won't have TikTok. That's what. I'm brilliant, he said, a quick grin filling his face. People like Jacob didn't particularly bother him, though he wasn't one to judge when other people were bothered by their behavior. Tommy took a quick word from his excellent buddy Wilbur said, I've heard worse from better people. Wilbur had been joking when he'd said it. Tommy said it matter of fact and straightforward, with no hint of sarcasm. He had a feeling that Jacob would have punched him in the face had they not been around a group of people. Instead, Jacob snarled in his face. He thought that felines were more the Terran equivalent of a cat, not a fucking dog. And Tommy grinned brightly, rolling his eyes. Oh, he knew how to, what was the human saying? Press people's buttons. You're dead. And you're a bitch, he said, watching as the first group reached the finish line. Sniff looked slightly nervous as she approached the white line, Velvet standing there slightly imposingly, and waiting at the finish line with his own clipboard. Must you antagonize him? Sniff hissed under her breath as she put her hands on the track. It's not my fault his mother didn't swallow when she had the chance. Please refrain from talking as we approach the start of the match, Mr. Michaels, Velvet drawled, unable to keep the amusement out of his voice. Jacob looked halfway between wanting to strangle Tommy and just shocked. Coach, he insulted my family. What? Velvet said, raising a scarlet eyebrow, his red fox ears twitching. Can't take it? Come on, Jacob. You're 19. Tommy here is 17 by a week. You're taller than him and more muscular. If you're so keen to show off, then beat him in this run. As his eyes ran over the 6 in the group, 4 of them deadly quiet, Tommy could have sworn that Velvet winked at him. I'm your coach, not your protector. You can damn well do that yourself. Now are you ready? It was a rhetorical question, and for once, Tommy kept his mouth shut. Good. 3, 2, 1, go. Tommy drew on his avian self, felt the smirk grow on his face, and fucking ran. Tommy, big man. How the fuck am I supposed to get up there? Fucking guard says that I need a pass. Tubbo, I don't have a pass. Get me a fucking pass. Tubbo, yeesh, I told them to let you up. Tommy, big man. How exactly did you describe me? Tubbo, I didn't. I had Wilbur do it because I was busy. Tommy, big man. Fuck. Tubbo, huh? Tommy, big man. He won't let me into the fucking transport room. I don't understand. Fucking let me in. Tubbo, I'll have Quackity give security a call. Also, I seriously gotta ask Wilbur what he made your description. Tommy, big man, gremlin child. My description was fucking gremlin child. I'm going to fucking kill that dickhead, pussy, bitch. Tubbo, okay, Tommy, whatever you say. He collapsed in the captain's chair with a theatrical groan, rubbing his face and sliding down until his spine was half bent over. Out, Philza told him, but there was no malice in his voice. How'd you get on the ship? Wilbur demanded. No thanks to you, he murmured, rubbing his face. I got a pass, though. He held up an ID card. Also, no fucking thanks to you guys. That transport had been fun to ride. About a 10-minute trip from Earth's surface to the space station where the L'Manberg was docked at, and meeting Tubbo there so he could get his ID. Drista told me that you tried out for the track team, Dream said, spinning around in his own chair. How'd it go? Oh, you did? Techno said, suddenly interested. Yes, son. How did your first day of school go? Philza said, with a slight mocking smirk. Terrible, he muttered. All they did was talk about syllabuses and shit that I already knew. Drista also said that you were smartass and basic leadership, Dream continued. Tommy groaned. It's not my fault they asked me a question that I already knew the answer to. He paused. Besides, she was too. She finished the answer after the teacher interrupted me. Of course she left that out, the blonde-haired human muttered. Back to the topic at hand, Philza said in his voice. How did track go? Did you do good? Good, Tubbo said, bursting through the door as the elevator arrived on the floor of the bridge. Look at this! He shoved his datapad into Phil's arms, and Tommy groaned again, staring at the white lights of the ceiling. What the hell? Phil said flatly. Techno plucked the datapad right out of his grip, the half-piglin, for some reason, curious about the whole endeavor, and then squinted, rereading it. Heh, you made the top spot on Varsity. Oh, Nikki's gonna kill you, Wilbur said happily. Tommy pointed an accusing finger at him. Don't you fucking tell her. It wasn't in my original plan, but fucking Jacob decided to bully this woman friend that I made, and then I insulted his mother, but that's not important. So I beat him. Unfortunately, he was faster than I expected, so I had to use my amazing avianness to win. His name is Jacob? Wilbur said in disbelief. Wow, I feel sorry for him. What kind of parents would ever do that to a poor kid? That's like asking for an app. That's what I said, Tommy exclaimed. He took it personally for some reason. Gee, Phil said dryly, handing the datapad back to an ecstatic Tubbo with a careful hand, his wings shuffling slightly. I wonder why. He crooked a finger at Tommy. Out of my chair, mate. Tommy gave another theatrical groan, dragging himself out of the chair and onto the floor. He lay there as Phil took his seat in the chair, amusement rented all over the captain's face. I'm dying. Why? Techno said in such a bored tone that Dream cackled. Because my parents are dead, he groaned, throwing an arm over his face. He sat up in this awkward silence, finding 5 pairs of eyes on him in various portions of pity. That's not what I meant. I meant that no one could sign my syllabus forms. That's not quite true, Phil said after a moment, swallowing awkwardly. I'm signed off as your temporary guardian. You are? He asked, keeping the lightheartedness in his voice and the darkness out. He did not know why Phil did that. why he'd ever want someone as broken as Tommy in his custody. Yeah, mate, Phil said, and Techno frowned at him. Wilbur just looked curious. You said you have something for me to sign? Tommy unhooked the datapad from his belt and chucked it at the captain. Phil's had caught it with a deft hand, raising an eyebrow at him as he swiped through the 7 different papers. You're in interspecies protocol? Tommy opened his mouth to answer, but Wilbur beat him to it. Maybe he'll learn some respect class. Fuck you. Not likely, though, the Phantom continued, drawling the last words as he flipped Tommy off. Well, Phil said, not looking up from where he was signing off the first of 7 papers with his finger. Gremlin child, Wilbur finished. Don't you have some transmissions to elucidate? Dream asked. I still don't understand why there are 7 Augustan dialects. Get to it then, nerd, Techno drawled, and Wilbur leveled a slight glare at him, no real heat behind it. The Phantom threw up his hands and turned his chair around, muttering some choice words under his breath that the bridge pretended not to hear. Why are you on the floor, Tommy? Tubbo sighed, leaning over Tommy's face and blocking the light. I'm dying, he told the boy thoughtfully. You should go see Nikki. Absolutely not. He ended up seeing Nikki anyway. The doctor was not happy that he joined track, never mind the fact that he'd used his abilities to beat a bully. Fortunately, after his daily dosage of anti-golden apples, Nikki let him off with a warning not to hurt himself. He intended to keep that promise. He ended up not. It wasn't even his fault. It wasn't. Ask anyone. It was your fault, Sniff told him later. It was definitely your fault, Wilbur said, eyes furrowed with worry as he tapped his fingers on the side of Tommy's medical bed. Just be careful, please. You had us worried. Tommy, Tubbo said, his brown eyes sad. What the fuck, mate? Phil said flatly. You should have fought back, Techno told him, eyes narrowed. If Tommy didn't know better, he would have said that Half-Piglin was angry. Not at Tommy, but at someone else. Of course, he didn't know better. I couldn't, he told them, time and time again. I couldn't. And maybe that was a lie. It was a week later the incident occurred that left Tommy in that horrific medical state. Sorry, my front door just blew open. I'll be right back. Yeah, I forgot to put the deadbolt in. It's fine now. It was a week later the incident occurred that left Tommy in that horrific medical state. It was a typical day after track practice. Ant and Velvet loved Tommy, more so than they ever had Jacob, and Tommy made sure to rub that in the feline's face, which, looking back, was a terrible idea. Tommy was chock full of terrible ideas. What started as an insult-flung competition turned into a fight. It wasn't really a fight. Tommy reviewed the security footage and hated every moment of it. Still, he'd had to because he couldn't remember it in person. Memories overwhelmed him when Jacob's fist came flying at his face, and he wasn't strong enough to take it. Tommy! Ant and Red were somewhere else. He didn't know, but Sniff's scream of pure terror got them coming. Yet they were too late, and Tommy was Tommy, and he was lost in his damn nightmares, and he was too weak. But he'd always been too weak, too stupid to save them, too dumb and small to fight back. He'd learned to take it in the prison, and so he lay on the ground with blood on his face and took the blows and kicks to his ribs as Sniff, bless her, tugged at Jacob's arm and screamed profanities with all she could muster. She didn't do much, but it was the thought that counted, and it was her screams that ended the one-sided brawl. Tommy didn't really remember that. He remembered the pain and feeling Jacob's foot slamming into his ribs and hot white pain filling him. He remembered the fists against his face and the sound of his nose breaking. He remembered squeezing his eyes shut and lifting his arms over his head and sobbing like the fucking coward he was as the foot slammed into his chest again and again and again and again. He remembered it stopping, and he remembered medics there, and he remembered something being shoved over his mouth because holy fuck, Jacob had broken his ribs, and one of them had punctured his lung, and he had nearly died. He remembered staring up at the bright lights and masked doctors and just lying there, wondering if this was where it ended, sort of wishing this was it. He had watched his friends die, and so his story should end here. It was only humane, right? He fell unconscious a few times and woke up to Wilbur screaming obscenities and Tubbo shouting something as well, and wanted to yell at them to be fucking quiet so he could die in peace. Still, perhaps he'd said that out loud because everything went deathly silent, and he was standing in a tunnel of blackness with light at the end. And it was calm there. It was peaceful. And Tommy thought, this is where I die. And he wasn't strictly opposed to that idea either, and that was what hurt him the most. But it wasn't. It wasn't, because he stood there waiting, and he could have sworn there were 5 figures there, 3 teenagers and 2 adults, and he knew their identities, but the miracles of modern medicine brought him back, and he felt the electricity arc through his chest as his heart beat once more, and he thought, I want this to end. This pain, this constant state of living with the memories of everything he had ever experienced, like Atnas from Techno's book of Greek myths. He felt like he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders, and he wanted it to just drop it and let it fucking flatten everything. He didn't want to carry the memories of an avian with gas-colored hair and a brilliant, lying smile of teeth and misleading love. He didn't want to carry the empty bonds of his parents and an aunt who had been his world for 10 years. He didn't want the pressure of being the only fucking one in the whole fucking universe who knew the full story of the Children's Rebellion and the Red Planet. He didn't want to be the last surviving child avian that was known. Fuck the Admiral anyway. He didn't want to be the only living crew member of the HMS Fran. He hadn't ever wanted any of this. He got it all anyway, and it fucking hurt every step of the way. But Tommy picked himself up. He pushed his problems aside, and he got up with a bounding step and a grin on his face, and he pretended that the reason his heart failed 3 times was not because he had willed it to. He pretended that he wanted to be here, wandering on the L'Manberg, doing his homework, joking with Wilbur, rolling his eyes as Tubbo facetiously flirted with Rombu, beaming as Purple showed him something new, and he pretended that everything was okay. Eventually, that thin band would snap, and Tommy wouldn't ever be able to sew it together again. But that time is not now, and so for the time being, he is okay. He opened his eyes to a beeping heart monitor, dim lighting. Tommy groaned, feeling as if he'd gotten run over by a train, and he sat up, noting the IV in his arm and the pulse oximeter on his middle finger. He blinked like there were rocks attached to his eyelids, and he knew that he should, medically, be in more pain. But if the used hyposprays piled on a cart said anything, it was that he was as high on painkillers as an addict was on heroin. He tilted his head as he glanced down at his body. If the throbbing in his eyes meant anything, it was probably that he had some black eyes, and stitches in his forehead, and his nose fucking hurt. Well, he'd broken that. He wondered why they hadn't used the regenerator on him yet. He shouldn't have a cast around his wrist, and his leg shouldn't be elevated. He should have a bone knitter in here, and sure enough, glancing around, it's abandoned in the corner. But why his leg is still healing confounded him. Surely Nikki wouldn't put him through this much pain on purpose. The office door burst, and Said Merling is standing there in her pink-haired glory, breathing hard. "Oh my God, you're awake," she said, and Tommy blinked at her, lips thick. Nikki slammed her head on a red button by her door, and Tommy cringed as the lights started to flash, wincing from the pain. She saw his look, pursed her lips, and then pressed it again. Thankfully, the light stopped. "Am I supposed to be anything else?" he slurred. "Yeah," Nikki said. "You should be dead." "Do you want me to be?" "What? No," Nikki exclaimed. "Of course not, Tommy. Why would you say that?" He tilted his head, thinking. "No. Lonnie came bursting through the door, her eyes wide, and Rambu followed shortly after. You're awake, Tubbo's sister breathed out, relief painting her face. We thought we were gonna lose you. Nearly did, Rambu admitted. Tommy blinked slowly. What happened? Nikki tapped her fingers on the metal table for attention. Your heart stopped, she said, not really looking very professional at the moment. At that moment, Tommy saw the dark circles under her eyes and wondered how long it had been. 3 times. We didn't know if he'd make it. Why? He asked. She shrugged. Ponk is running tests, but I don't know. We don't know. Nobody in the fleet knows. Tommy had a horrible inkling of an idea, but he doesn't say it out loud. Every time we tried to use the regenerator or or any tech, your heart would stop and we'd be forced to revive you. It was horrible, Lonnie said with tears in her eyes. We watched you die, Rambu said, blinking at him with his heterochromatic eyes. His voice shook slightly, though people who didn't know him that well wouldn't have noticed. Tommy wasn't supposed to know him that properly, but, well, and maybe he wanted to die. But that inkling of doubt trickling in made Tommy question everything. Did he? Did he really? Maybe. That scared him more than anything. And that is the end of chapter 12. Let me stop sharing the screen. So, all right. So, all right. So, I was going to crochet for a little bit afterwards. But I do, because TikTok Live is restricted now, I don't know if I'm going to do that. Just because, yeah, I've lost one of my platforms. And also, I don't know if you can hear it, but I'm kind of losing my voice because I did not drink enough water in preparation for this. So, let me see. I think I'm going to end stream here. And let's see. Anyone who's watching on YouTube, I want you to come over to Twitch. Let me get the link for you guys. I want you to come over to Twitch so that we can have a raid. Okay. If you're on YouTube, I just put Twitch link in the chat. And yeah. So let's see. Who do I follow that is live? And not close to ending. Because it would be bad if I rated them right as they were ending. Don't see anyone live. Okay, who's in my recommended? Let's see. Oh, this person's doing a charity stream. What are they doing a charity for? Okay, so we are going to raid Puffball Cloud. All right, let me do this. Raid Puff. Actually, let me try and do this. I always mess up the raid, so I want to make sure I do this correctly. Okay. All right, raid channel. I'm going to do Puffball Cloud. Yeah, Puffball Cloud. All right. All right. Thank you guys so much for coming out. I hope you enjoyed. If you did not catch the whole thing, the VOD will be up on my channel pretty soon, or right as I end stream. But yeah, so everyone go watch Puffball Live, and thank you guys all for coming out. Love you all. And